So welcome once again. We are going to continue with our series. We have named this series Reopening Church Buildings in a New Reality. And this is meant for both clergy and lay leaders in our church. Today's topic is something that have been in our feature, especially connecting to the feedback on our mailing list, priest mailing list. It came up as a conversation, as a question there, and it developed into this document that you received in the invitation and this webinar as well, and this conversation that we are going to have. So this webinar will discuss why embracing technology, even for small and medium-sized parishes, has become essential during the pandemic and why it will continue to be so even after the pandemic has faded. In addition to the why, the goal is to equip and empower parishes with enough knowledge about audiovisual equipment that will make informed decisions when moving forward, having a digital presence in their communities. And we are grateful and thankful to both Father Kevin and Father Niels for taking the opportunity to be here with us. Welcome, Father Kevin, Father Niels.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi. Hi, everyone.
So we, Niels and I don't have a script that we're doing. We want to keep this kind of loose.
Fluid.
Fluid, good word. But we wanted to kind of start off by talking about why this is important. I mean, I think the obvious reason is COVID. And while we were shut down before, it is very possible, as we all look at the COVID numbers, we may be shut down again. And so there's a need to be present in another way. But I will say this, streaming services is something that has been done around the country prior to COVID. I have a good friend back in Savannah, where I moved from in May, who's been streaming his services for well over a year and is really exploring what it means to have a second campus digitally. He's even welcomed his first digital member who lives in Michigan over the last month. So there are a plethora of reasons of why we should do this, even outside of the whole COVID thing.
Yeah. Now, I have to admit that before COVID, although I was aware that, like Kevin said, that there are churches doing streaming, I guess that I sort of categorize those churches as kind of at the evangelical end of the spectrum and very rich. And certainly that's kind of a truism, but it's not exclusively. I was a campus minister at Duke University, and Duke University has been live streaming its services for years. But I have to admit that until necessity became the mother of invention in March, I was rather resistant to the idea of live streaming, because I just think that the in-person gathering is so important, and it seemed to me that this might dilute that. But out of necessity, has obviously come the situation that we're in. But actually, I find myself a fresh convert, having been streaming now, because I think that there are, obviously, we do greatly miss the in-person presence, and I think for a Eucharistic community, there is no substitute for that. But I've discovered so many wonderful things that have arisen from the opportunity to stream online, and whether that's a shaky old smartphone or the highest level broadcast equipment, what it's enabled certainly us in this parish to do is reconnect with so many alums of the parish who actually had left but really hadn't found another church home. It's enabled us to connect with people who are friends around the world. It's really helped those who were already struggling to get out because of mobility problems before COVID to connect with us again. So you know, our average Sunday attendance has at least doubled, if not tripled.
Yeah, and it's funny for me being up here in Briarcliff, up in Westchester. I'm a Floridian, a third generation Floridian, and I'm in a church where the snowbirds come from, which I'm used to receiving them in Florida. But I'm experiencing the opposite, and this has allowed some of our snowbirds to stay connected when they're down living it up in the subtropics.
Mm. So the other thing that I would say is that I I've really learned so much in the last 4 months about streaming. I mean, in March, I was faced with a Sunday, I can't remember which Sunday it was, mid-March, when we were just about to go into lockdown. We had in person, I really had not got a clue what I was doing. I could barely get it together with the iPhone. And I have just learned a tremendous amount. So I want to say that I'm by no means an expert, and I've just learned a lot on the fly. And it's been at times extremely frustrating experience. I want to say that some technology can be incredibly frustrating, but I want folks in the diocese to know, you know, that you've got friends here who have been through this experience and can be there for you. And you know, certainly as far as I'm concerned, you know, happy after this webinar's finished, if you want to shoot me an email at any time and say, look, help, I just can't figure this out, the chances are that I've probably been there and wanted to throw my computer out of the window and then figured it out. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if anything, the way that we looked at this was when we began this project, at least the way I looked at it, I should say, I don't know a lot about fixing cars, but I know enough about cars that when I take it to a mechanic, I can pretty much guarantee I'm not going to get ripped off or sold something I don't need. Unfortunately, what I've found over the years, I've played music my whole life and toured with bands, and have been pretty intimate with sound systems. And what I've found over the years is that some of the companies that install and sell AV equipment get really excited when they have churches call them, probably especially Episcopal churches, because they expect there to be a lot of money to be had. And so if we can in any way, shape, or form help you to be informed enough that when you do make these phone calls and maybe you reach out to another expert or a company to help you out, you have enough knowledge how to make a informed purchase.
The other thing I would want to add, absolutely, that's yeah, definitely great advice. And the other thing, which I think people might not be aware of, is that when you want to do an installation that maybe is a little more permanent and involves cables and running cables and that kind of thing, those kinds of installation companies, AV companies, can make it sound like this is something, you know, just under the Holy Grail in terms of being able to achieve. Actually, you know, I can guarantee that in your congregations, you will have folks who are quite happy, you know, running cables. It's no harder, and in fact, it's easier than running electrical cables in your home if you're wiring a new receptacle or a ceiling fan. It's just different connectors, but the basic principles are the same. So a lot of that installation expense can be taken care of in kind within your parish.
Absolutely. Yeah, you don't have to worry about being electrocuted running audio video wires.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Nils.
I was going to say that you know, I do think, like Kevin was saying earlier, though, that this is what's happened over the last 7 months or however long it's been. It seems like 7 years. Is something that was already happening. We were, I think, I think what it's done, and we say this in the document, is that a process that might have taken us in the Episcopal Church 10 years has been accelerated to 10 months. And so I think we would have been going down the streaming route and having digital members in the long run anyway. And this has just, kind of forced it upon us at a very rapid pace. But I mean, I think the reasons for us going down that trend are numerous and complicated. I mean, in a community like the one that I serve, where there are snowbirds, where there are people who, go away at the weekends as a norm, that kind of thing, or kids sports or whatever. Being able to join church remotely is a very practical option for them. There is a little bit of me, obviously, that is regretful that that is the case, but I guess that, above all in the church, we are called to meet people where they are, not where we might like them to be. And where they are, oftentimes, is online. So that's really what we're doing, essentially.
Yeah, and this is just part of this shift that we're doing in a culture from modernity to whatever this post-modernity is going to be. It's post-Christendom work. It's important work for us to think about. And like Neil said, I mean, I came from an evangelical world. I was a United Methodist pastor in the Deep South, into this more liturgical and Eucharistic world. And it's hard to wrap our minds around that, especially as a church that really, really values and focuses on that sort of piece of everything. So, but this is where we're going. And so this is a great opportunity to think through this. And I'll say, we've talked about being able to reach people all over the place, but what I have found over time is that this actually offers us an opportunity to be very hyper present in our community in a way that we haven't done so well in the last couple decades. This is a way for some people in our community to dip their toes in that are a little nervous about stepping into the church.
Absolutely.
So I think if we first think about this as an opportunity, and then go from there. Like we said in the beginning, this is we don't have scripts and whatnot, but we're kind of thinking this in a couple sections. So this first section is the why, and we'll get to the nitty gritty of it as we move on. But before we move on, are there any questions about the why?
There are some questions. Thank you for this first why. I think there. Going. Would you mind going online and asking the question that you just placed on the chat?
I think you're muted, my friend.
Muted.
Yeah, I'm still figuring out Zoom after all this,
Yeah.
Right. Thank you for the presentation. Me too. I've totally realized that I was reticent, and now it's clear that this will be helpful for us. I think that's right. I guess I just had a couple technical things. I don't know if you're planning on getting into the technical stuff, because I can wait.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Then I'll wait. You'll see them on the side, because. Oh,
yeah, I saw some of your things pop up about cabling. We'll definitely.
Yeah. So if you're going to talk about that, then I'll wait. So.
Cool.
Right.
I mean, the only other thing that I wanted to add in this kind of first little section, which follows on from the other things we've been saying, is, and again, this is said in the little booklet, is that this is a huge missionary opportunity. Really, it is an extraordinarily important opportunity. It's a gift in many ways to us, and there aren't many gifts in 2020. But that's, I think it's good to see it positively. But the point I want to make is that that therefore, missionary imperatives. I think because because when we make decisions in church, we often tend to be driven by finite financial resources rather than the missionary imperatives. And I know obviously money is an extremely serious concern, but nonetheless, I think if we can start from, as we should with all church decisions, if we can start from a position of what is it that we need to do mission wise to be the gospel in this place online, what resources do we need to do that, and then when you've figured that out, let the money follow that missionary calling. Don't say, well, we don't have any money, we're not going to have any money, so we're going to just be a shadow of what we could be. I know it's easy for me to say that, but it's one of the great promises of God is that that abundance and the means to do things do follow a missionary calling. So
Yeah,
I want to encourage you.
And you have two people doing this presentation that were both campus ministers, and I was a church planner as well. And so we're used to having to find the money that meet the mission. That's just part of that work. So I can say from my perspective that is possible.
Yeah.
And campus ministry and church planning wouldn't happen unless that was the way things can work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any more questions, Victor, about the why that we can jump to, or we can move on?
Yeah, I think there continue to be technical, like good lighting, cameras. I think it's more, I think we can move on to that. Yeah.
Sure. Well, then I just wanted to do a little primer on the audio part, because AV is audio and visual. Like I said, I've played music my whole life. And there's a few things that you'll run into in running sound, which is connected to the whole video part. But we'll get to that. So when you're looking at a sound system, they can look very complicated. There's wires running everywhere. There's different pieces. But in the reality, there are three basic pieces to a sound system. You have a mixing board, which is the one that has all the knobs. You have an amplifier, which is the engine behind it, if you will, and you have speakers. And in today's world, some of those things are combined. There's a lot of what they call powered mixers, where the amplifier is attached to the mixers. And there's even powered speakers now, but that's neither here nor there. The most complicated part of any sound is the mixing board. And what you'll see when you look at a mixing board, if you can imagine one in your head, typically they are broken up into what are called channels. So you have those numbers on the bottom. Channels run from usually in banks of 4, but they can be anywhere from a 4-channel mixing board to a 32 channel. I've seen ones that take up whole rooms when I was recording. But each channel has a bunch of knobs, and there's different sections of knobs. If you look at the top, typically, or where you is called the gain, and that's really important to know about. I'll get back to that. And then you have the EQ, your high, mid, and low range frequencies. Sometimes you have things that say aux on it, or effects under that. And then you'll have a slider typically that's the volume. So being able to EQ things is important, but the two most important knobs that are the most complicated and to get the most attention are the gain and the volume. And they're important to understand because they do different things. And most of us in seminary didn't learn the difference between gain and volume. So let me give you a little analogy to start with. So first of all, the big difference is that volume is how loud the output of the channel is when you hear it, and the gain is how loud the input is when it goes into the channel. But let me come back to that. So gain is the trickiest one because we can conceptualize volume. Volume is decibels, right, is what we hear. Gain is kind of like if you imagine you go to wash your car and you have a bucket you need to fill up with water and you bring the garden hose out. Well, you can have the spigot turned to really low and it's manageable, but the water fills up too slowly, right? Or you can turn the spigot up all the way and the bucket may fill up faster, but it's splashing all over the place. That's kind of how gain works. It's that the amount of signal that's going into the channel before you do anything to it. And it's important to have the right amount of signal because either the, again, Gowan,
Yes.
the microphones are important and we'll get to that for sure, but having the right amount of gain is very important because what you'll either have is you'll have that very tinny, thin sounding voice on a microphone, or you can have distortion. So if you have too much gain, all the rock and roll guitar players learned about how to use gain in the 50s and 60s. Jimi Hendrix would be a perfect example. If you turn up gain, all the gain all the way, it's like that garden hose just exploding and it causes distortion. So if you listen to rock and roll music, I play in a punk band that's really loud and obnoxious. I do not suggest looking it up because it's just not good. But the guitars are very distorted and that's done by having the gain very high and then you can adjust the volume. So I could be happy to answer questions about that because I'm trying to keep it on the surface because they can be very complicated. But from there, like was suggested in the chat that I saw pop up, having good microphones are important. The industry standard since I was a kid and probably before that is the brand Shure, S-H-U-R-E. There's a lot of great other brands, but a Shure, what is called an SM58, which is their standard microphone that you've seen. If you picture a microphone in your head, you are picturing an SM58 or a copy of an SM58. It is really hard to beat one of those. I have seen them thrown off of stage, crashing to concrete floors, picked up and used, and they sound exactly the same. And they run for about $100 a piece. Having good microphones, you don't have to have a $300 microphone, but investing in a decent quality one is really important as well. As far as the amplifier part, it's important to make sure you have enough, enough power to run your speakers. You don't want too small of an amplifier because then you run into that whole distortion thing. Again, I would suggest or suspect for most of our small and medium size sanctuaries that 250 watts will do you just fine. You probably don't need 1,000-watt amplifiers or anything higher than that. But between 100 and 250 is completely fine. And you don't need humongous speakers either with subwoofers and 8-10-inch woofers and whatnot. Small speakers work just fine for the majority of what we're doing, unless you're running a full band with bass guitar and kick drum in it. Having speakers that are, they're typically measured in inches. 12 inches is plenty big, and my church actually has speaker cabinets that are about this big. You know, the main speaker maybe 10 inches, and they do just fine for our small sanctuary. I'm kind of rambling. Are there any questions that I can answer to stop rambling? I haven't been following these, Victor, if there's some good ones that you've seen.
I think the best way we now, if you have any question, just to unmute and ask the question at this point.
Yeah, that'd be great. Punk mass.
Yeah, I have a question. You talked about the mixing board. At our church, we have a sound system that was installed.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I know, we don't have a mixing board that's associated with that. Is that something we should think about?
No, and I should say there's varying degrees of, you have a mixing board. It may not look like what I'm talking about. Even at All Saints, our mixing board is in what's called a rack. and it's about 3 inches tall, and it only has volume knobs. So there has to be some kind of piece in your sound system that literally mixes all of the different sounds together into one signal that goes into the speakers. So you have a mixing board, it just may be much simpler, and that's totally fine for our small and medium churches, unless you're running instruments, guitars, even keyboards. You don't have to have super robust mixing boards. Does that answer your question, David?
I think that does answer my question. I'll look at that when I go back. We do have an electric organ that plays during the services. I'm thinking that would get picked up on the microphones that we have in the church and be okay without running a cord from that to the mixing board.
Yeah, most organs, they have their own way of producing sound, and don't need to be going through the sound system anyway.
Great.
The only thing I would add is that, and we'll get onto this later as well, is that if you choose to do your streaming to the internet, wherever that is, using some special broadcasting streaming software, then depending on how modern your organ or keyboard is, there are some advantages to plugging that into the mixing desk, because then that will give a better quality of sound to the live stream. But we'll get onto that.
Yeah, and Michael, you have a similar question.
Yeah,
I see, and we'll get onto that. And it's really a matter of how you choose to stream. If you do go a multi-camera setup, most of the cameras that we're going to be talking about don't have microphones on them, so you have to have a separate audio source and way to plug that into the stream. But we'll get to that for sure.
Yeah.
Let me just run through and make sure I'm not missing anything important.
Yeah. There is something here again for Gowan. It says, liturgically, should the celebrant carry a selfie stick?
Now, the reason why I asked that, in fairness, is because I imagine we're trying to go public, and there is an element that we are creating a spectacle. Now, there's there's a theological issue about being a spectacle, no doubt, but so the tension I'm having now in real time is that I don't feel as if I'm able to do the liturgy as well, because I'm not processing, right? Really, I mean, not in my context. And yet I want to make sure that there's something visually exciting for the person watching. So, so some of my questions have to do with quality. I mean, I will say, unless it's like the National Cathedral and a few other places, I find watching services to be kind of dreadful. I mean, not all the time, but I mean, I just find them, I mean, maybe it's because I'm not related to the community, maybe whatever, but I think, so how do we get to a minimum level of quality so that at least the people in our parish will forgive us, I guess. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, can I leap in and say something about that? When we first started streaming at my church, it was an iPhone in one place, and people just had the same view week in, week out kind of thing. I did occasionally put the tripod somewhere else to be daring and give people a change. But I think that because we live in a world where people in ordinary life see very high broadcast values, and actually when you watch it, I mean, you don't even notice it when you're watching a TV show or even the news or whatever, but that you're only looking at a particular clip or frame or whatever for barely a few seconds, and then it cuts to something else, and then it cuts to something else, then it cuts to something else. So people are just not used to looking at the same thing even for 15-20 seconds, and I think people's attention spans expect something different. So one of the reasons that in my parish, we decided to go to a 2-camera setup, and I'll say a bit about cameras in a bit, is because once you've got 2 cameras, and they're both, as it were, live, even though only one's broadcasting at once, you can then chop from one to another to another to another, and you can give people that that kind of relief from, you know, just the boredom of one camera view. And I think that when we first started doing it, and there was this kind of, you know, we were all in it together spirit in March, and people kind of thought it was, you know, we were scrambling to get it right, and it was all a bit shaky, and, you know, the iPhone fell off its tripod, and people were very forgiving about that. I think now, 7-8 months down the line and looking forward, people are going to increasingly have very different expectations about the professional quality.
And let me jump onto that, and then Michael has a good question that we'll get to. You know, coming from the contemporary evangelical world, there's a trap here. We should always do things with excellence. However, we have to remember what we have to offer. We have to offer a connection with a cosmic connection with the creator of the universe, and a reconciled relationship through Jesus Christ. A lot of churches in the evangelical world get into this trap of trying to produce this really amazing rock concert. And being in a band and touring, I can tell you I've never seen a church produce it the same way, because a rock musician and rock venues are made to produce rock concerts. Churches are not. That's not what we have to offer. So I would say that as long as we're doing it with excellence and continuing, like Neil said, to try to do a little better, we have to remember what we have to offer and make sure that that is purely excellent. And I'm sure, having heard about you from my former bishop, again, I'm sure you offer everything with excellence. So I'm sure that's not a problem.
Well, and one of the things that you know, having streaming software allows one to do is to actually, that we're actually then able to do more than we could do in a simple, ordinary, fully in-person service. Like, for instance, it means that in my sermon, let's say, or let's say in a reading, okay, you've got a reading, it's about, you know, you get the word denarius, or you get, you know, one of those Old Testament readings where there are a million strange place names or whatever. You can actually, you know, you can stick up a map, or you can stick up a picture, or you could even put in some little clip of video footage of something else. And so there are ways of keeping people's attention, but in a way that actually really enhances their experience, so that you're tying together not only the liturgy, but more comprehensive teaching at the same time, so that you're able to really, you know, enhance the experience that people get over and above what they would otherwise have in person in church.
So can I ask a question there?
Yes.
Yeah, this is David. I'm just wondering, when you're talking about streaming software, you're not talking about software that's used when you live stream the service and send it out on Facebook, right?
No, I'm not. And maybe we're getting close to the point where we should sort of start going into that a little bit. Should I talk a little bit about video? Kevin, do you want to say any more about audio?
No, and I think, Michael, this will answer your question too as Niels goes on. And the last thing I'll say is that it's always easier to pronounce weird names in the Bible right if you have a British accent. So you have that going on the rest of us.
So video. So the most straightforward way of broadcasting, whether you're recording it and then transmitting it after it's happened, or whether you're doing it live, is going to be a smartphone. Smartphone cameras now, certainly for the last couple of years, they have been really superb. I have an iPhone 11 now. The camera is fantastic on that, really, really good. But there are two crucial things about using a smartphone. Well, there are four crucial things, actually. One is landscape. Okay, I mean, I guess everyone knows the words portrait or landscape, but just forgive me, if I'm saying something utterly obvious, because it's not always the case that people do this. Portrait is when your phone's up this way. Landscape is when your phone's this way. And it is absolutely essential that your phone is, like Gawin's doing, yes, is in landscape mode, because that is the way that screens are configured to watch video. So imagine that you're watching a TV and someone's watching your service on TV, and orient your phone in that way. Also, your camera, your smartphone, if you're using a smartphone, it's got cameras at the front and the back. Obviously, it's got the front camera for selfies and, when you're doing a Zoom and you want to, or you're FaceTiming or something like that. But the cameras at the back are better quality than the one at the front. So always orient it so that your back cameras are the ones that are filming the action, and you can see what's being filmed on the screen as well. So it's doubly good. But always make sure you do that. Another crucial thing is use a tripod. It's so distracting to have an image that is consistently kind of wobbling around, and unless you are definitely trying to do a kind of a first person documentary where you're going for the shaky camera effect, just use a tripod. And you can get really good tripods for really affordable sums of money, but you really need to try and spend at least $50 on a tripod. And the reason for that is simply the gauge of metal that they're made from and the sturdiness that they are, because you'd be surprised that a really cheap tripod, you think it'd be okay, but because it's so light, it will wobble anytime anyone walks past it or whatever. So it is well worth investing in something that's a good brand. The tripod that we used here is by an Italian brand called Manfrotto, which is one of the best tripod brands you can buy, but they're also affordable. If you need to make your tripod a bit more solid, there's an old camera person's trick, which is to get like an old brick or a really heavy stone or something like that, and tie it up in string, and then tie the other end of the string around the top of the tripod where the phone attaches to it, and that would just give it a lot more stability. It just won't look very pretty, but it'll make the picture better. So yeah, smartphone is the most straightforward way of getting images either recorded or streamed. But you could use, if you've got a digital SLR camera, you could always use that, because most of those are set up to have video capability. Or if you've got a digital video camera, then that'll work fine too. Again, you need a tripod if you're going to use one of those, same deal. But then if you want to go further than that, then your next step up is something called a PTZ camera, which is just short for pan, tilt, zoom. So in other words, it's a camera that will either be on a tripod or more likely will be permanently mounted on a wall or a shelf or something like that solidly. And it just means that you can command it remotely to move in all three axes. So it can pan, and it can tilt, and then it can zoom in and out. And that gives you immense comprehensiveness. You can zoom into the altar in the Eucharistic prayer. You can zoom back out. You can have it go over to the lectern or whatever. But once you've started to get into the realm of a PTZ camera, or you've got into the realm of more than one camera, then really the only way to successfully manage the broadcast is having all of those video and audio signals go through a computer, and running through broadcast software. Now that kind of sounds terrifying, but it actually isn't as terrifying as you might think. For a start, there are free broadcast software apps out there. The one that we use here at this church is called OBS. It's probably the most widespread open source free broadcast software, and it's basically a way of combining all of your audio inputs, so all of your mics and organ, and if that's the case, or any electronic instruments or anything like that, plus all of your video signals, all that all comes into the computer, and then the computer program, the OBS program, kind of smushes it all together and then sends it out to Facebook Live or YouTube, or just records it to the hard drive. What I would say is that if you do want to go the route of using a computer program broadcast software, you will need a computer that has a minimum processing speed of a minimum processor of Intel i7 or equivalent, because there's just so much high amount of such a high amount of information, big files as it were, flying at the computer almost constantly, that if you don't have that kind of speed of processor, then you're just going to get lots and lots of time delays and spinning egg timers. Any questions about any of the video side of things? Kevin, we can't hear. There you go.
See, I'm still learning to use Zoom too. I think, Gowan, and I'm saying your name correctly. Yes? Okay. There's some of your questions that you asked earlier about installation and cabling. I think it's really important to remember, at least for me, coming from the South and coming from a different world, I love the beauty of the architecture of our buildings. I literally, when I interviewed at All Saints, I couldn't help it. I walked into the sanctuary for the first time and I looked around and I think I audibly said, wow, it's beautiful. And I don't want to clutter it up with wires and cameras stuck in weird places. So being able to mount them and running the wires in just a thoughtful way is really important. And having this multiple camera setup allows for things like if you're doing the Eucharist and you're streaming the Eucharist, for the audience on the camera to see what's actually happening and to have that intimacy, because that's really what we're wanting to make sure that we still have. That's really our fight, I think, is this idea of intimacy. We're used to having that in person, and the screen seems to create a lack of that. But there are ways to to make sure that that's still there in the way that we do this broadcast. And like Nils said, I'm very new to this. When I lived in Savannah, all that I did for broadcasting, one of my priest friends down there is also a film professor at Savannah College of Art and Design. And so he just did everything for me and I never had to worry about it. But I've come up here and I don't have Father Professor Michael Cheney in my back pocket, and I'm having to learn how to do things too. And it's very user-friendly.
Kevin and Neil, there is a question here, I think a contribution and question at the same time. Do all the cameras fit to the computer? And then Michael continues, we use a boom mic for everything. Will one cable go from that video camera to the computer? So that kind of related question.
So what I use, and Nils is definitely more the expert on the video side. I use a little device called a switcher. And in the video world, to me, I relate that to a mixing board, and it takes all of the inputs. It takes all the camera inputs, and there's audio inputs, and then that sends that to the computer because I have a Mac and it doesn't have all the right plugs. So there's lots of ways to do the audio. Certainly one boom mic works, but there's also ways, and why we talked about the mixer and the soundboard, there are ways to do a direct out of your soundboard and be able to mix the sound a little bit better and have that sound going into your live feed.
Just going back to when I was talking about, the simplest option, which is an iPhone or an Android on a tripod. What I would say about that, and that's a very, very good option, and it's straightforward, and you don't need any other equipment other than a Wi-Fi signal and the phone and a tripod. But I would say that even though the phones do have a built-in microphone, a real game changer is when you plug in a external mic into the phone. And so the way it happened in my parish was, we started out for a few weeks with just the iPhone, and people could just about hear. And then someone said, look, I'm having a little difficulty hearing. Can we pay for you to get a microphone? So that was really lovely, and what we decided to do was just get a Bluetooth lavalier mic, so just a clip-on mic, and I would wear that. It's made by an Australian company called Rode, R-O-D-E. The O's got a little line through it, and it's really good quality. It wasn't cheap. This person was happy to pay that, though. You plug like a transmitter thing into your iPhone, and then you wear a receiver thing, the other way around, with a clip-on mic, and that absolutely game changed.
And Gowan made a good point as well. There's Shure makes a microphone that plugs directly into a tablet called an MV88, and I've actually done live recording with my band with one of those. And those work really well. They're very reasonably priced, and it plugs right in. And when Nils is talking about a phone, you can also use a tablet as well.
Oh yeah.
And Michael asked if people are live feeding on Facebook from their phone, and that's the answer is 100% yes. I have a 3-camera video set up, but right now I don't have anybody in my church that is willing to volunteer to run it. So we're still using a tablet in the meantime until I can get a volunteer that feels comfortable enough to run that.
Yeah. And then skipping back to the question about all of the video inputs going into the computer or whatever. So with the cameras that we've got, the cameras send their signals, and then we've got a little, as it were, box for want of a better word, of electronics that the camera plugs into, and out of the other end of this little box is a USB connection. And so, it's possible to connect up ultimately a lot of the cameras and a lot of the sound via USB into your computer. What we did is we bought a mixing desk. It was a fairly straightforward 12-channel Yamaha mixing desk. It was like $300, and it's got a USB output. So basically everything sound-wise comes into the mixing desk, and then you just got a USB cord that goes straight into your computer, and it just makes it so simple. And that deals with, the video comes in via USBs, the sound comes from the mixing board via USB, and then it goes into the broadcast software, and the broadcast software does its thing and sends it out to Facebook Live.
There's a question here, contribution, I believe, as well, is heavy stone walls interfere with signal, especially in dense urban area. Do we need to hardwire the internet to internet?
Yes. This is a really important question. Again, our experience here was that that when we started in March, we basically just had a regular Wi-Fi router that had just, been fine from time immemorial, and but it was very weak in the sanctuary, and so the service was a bit choppy. Sometimes it would just sort of cut out completely, and then you get people messaging us saying we lost the service, and we actually upgraded. We live in a FiOS fiber optic area, and so we were able to upgrade to fiber optic. That helped tremendously. And then we put in what's called a Wi-Fi mesh system, which is kind of a bit like Wi-Fi extenders that all work together. We've written about this in the document. And that helped again tremendously, because having a really solid Wi-Fi signal. But then we in the end ran a cable from where the internet comes in to the building. We ran a cable through the basement up into the sacristy, which is where all of our equipment is, so that the computer had a hardwired internet connection. And then we were able to run from that hardwired internet connections to both of the cameras as well. It just, in the end, it saves you a lot of headaches. But actually, internet cable is really, even, like 100 meters of the stuff, 100. It's at Home Depot, and anyone who can wire a plug or fit a ceiling fan can totally run hardwired internet to the remotest reaches of your building.
And I mean, what we ended up doing, because our building is shaped like an L, or our campus is shaped like an L, we ended up having to just get a separate Wi-Fi system, that little system that you can buy, some very simple and plugged a wall socket. We've used those. We were doing outdoor worship for a long time this summer, and we had an extender to get the signal out into our courtyard. Yeah, and as Cheryl said, an extender and a booster are very similar things. But you have to, you want to make sure you have a strong connection, because like Neil said, we had a Sunday where I wasn't paying attention and my tablet connected to the wrong Wi-Fi signal to some other Wi-Fi signal, and it cut out right in the middle of the best part of my sermon. And so the poor people on streaming online didn't hear the meat in that I had worked really hard on my sermon. So yeah.
That is actually, that just reminds me of the two other important points about using a smartphone, and they're in the primer as well, which is, don't forget to put it onto airplane mode, so that you don't get someone who's like texting you in the middle of your streaming, and don't forget to connect it up to a charger all the time that you're streaming, because streaming is quite battery hungry. And there was one service I remember where, the phone makes a little beeping noise when it's got like 5% battery, and it did this like beeping like halfway through the Eucharistic prayer, and I was spinning the whole time thinking, please, 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 just please last. And it did, but you don't want to be doing that.
If you're streaming on Facebook and people are commenting on the stream, and you don't have your phone on silent or on airplane mode or both, you're going to be getting sounds from every time somebody says, "Oh, I really like that point of the sermon," or "I can't hear you," or whatever comment you get.
Right. And in fact, what I'm kind of realizing is that there's a whole new, back in the early church, that there were all sorts of orders of ordained ministry. There was an ordained ministry of doorkeeper and all that kind of stuff. Well, that was kind of analogous to our situation now, that there are all kinds of new ministries, and it's almost like, running the AV could be an acolyte ministry, but you could have someone. It's a good idea to have someone maybe in the congregation, whose job is to be following the stream, muted maybe on their tablet, and specifically answering people who are putting comments up, because it's a really important ministry, particularly when it's people who are, just speculatively, stopping by, new, whatever. It's a kind of ushering in a different way.
And I did that role when I was a deacon, helping out with a new church plant in Savannah during the stream. That was my job, was responding and addressing any kind of needs. There were times where I needed to adjust something in the stream that Father Cheney didn't know was happening. So, and I was able to answer questions and kind of jump into the chat and add some extra just depth to it.
Yeah.
Michael, to answer your question, it really depends on how separate your sanctuary is. Really, I mean, it was the whole mesh.
We estimated 300 feet of cable to get from the sanctuary to the router that exists in the office.
There are special, I can't remember what they're called now, but there are special things that you hardwire to the outside of the building from where you do have the internet, which will then transmit to a dedicated receiver, which is screwed to the outside of the building on the sanctuary, and they're specifically for this purpose of going from building to building with the same internet package.
Yeah, but you may run into just a point where spending, you may decide that it's worth it to get a separate Wi-Fi source in your sanctuary.
Also, at a pinch, there have been a couple of occasions where I have asked someone in the congregation, "Hey, look, can we just use your can we just tether to your data from your phone?" And they just, they set it up as a hotspot, and we just connect to that. If you've got a good cell phone service signal in your area, then that will work perfectly well.
And that's really going to be another frontier as 5G and 5G and sometimes faster than our internet signals. So
absolutely. I mean, I think that the a lot of what we've just talked about with wired connections and some of these issues of buildings are going to be resolved by 5G.
I have another question. I've been listening to the conversation. I've learned a lot. Thank you very much. But my question is, it sounds like you have several people running this whole setup during the service. Is that true, or do you set it up and just let it run?
It really depends on the simplicity of how you set it up. I mean, to do what Niels is doing, you do have to have some volunteers running things. Right now, like I said, we're just using a tablet, and we have decided to process so that I can turn the tablet on and off as I process and recess into worship. And so it literally, I'm still running everything. I mean, I'm not able to respond to any issues that happen, which is a problem. But you can go from that end of simplicity to Niels can tell you how many people he has working with his setup.
Yeah, so I mean, and of course, when we first did things, it was me, my iPhone, and I was basically in charge of kind of everything. I did find that pretty stressful because you need to be able to concentrate on leading the liturgy, but and then someone else took over just using the iPhone on the tripod. But really, you can just leave it to its own devices and just check in on it. But once you do move to a more multi-camera setup with broadcast running through broadcast software, then you do certainly need. I mean, you could have it running, but you'd only have it running with one camera. If you want to switch between cameras, which is after all the whole point of it, and you do want to inject other things into it, like sermon illustrations, or what we're currently using it. One of the things we're doing now is asking people who are stuck at home and not able to go out, particularly elderly parishioners. We're asking them to record the readings for the Sunday on their iPhones in landscape, by the way, and then they just email that over, and then we just slot that into the service at the appropriate point. So yes, you do definitely need someone who is in the audiovisual room, which in our case is a sacristy, and we were lucky enough to our director of music happens to enjoy all the techie stuff, and he was a perfect person to do this. But we've got a couple of other people who are interested as well, and it's the kind of thing that actually might appeal to some of your parish youth as well, because it does involve quite a lot of cool equipment, and it also gives people a chance to be very creative, and it's actually a really good thing to put on a resume as well.
Great, thank you very much.
Could I just get a sense from folks who are on the call what you are currently doing, if you are streaming, if you're not streaming, or if you're just are you pre-recording, are you using Zoom, are you doing it to Facebook? What kind of setups have you got in your parishes at the moment?
So we looked into both options early on, live streaming and pre-recording, and we found that it was much cheaper in terms of equipment and an original investment of energy and understanding to do the pre-recording. So we do the pre-recording, It looks gorgeous.
Mm.
It's got great sound. We have more than one camera. We switch. We show pictures of the stained glass while we're playing the prelude and all that stuff. It looks great.
Awesome.
But then a lot of people are saying, and it's produced on YouTube. But a lot of people are saying, I want it live streamed. I want it today, and I'm like, why? I don't understand why, first of all. And secondly, this conversation hasn't made me more comfortable that live streaming is simpler.
I certainly think that if you don't have the kind of equipment that enables you to use the broadcast software, and you don't have someone who's prepared to sit in front of all the equipment during the service, then I certainly agree that the only realistic way of getting the kind of quality of experience that you've just described is by pre-recording it. Nonetheless, I do see what people mean about live. I think there's something about just knowing that everyone in the church family is doing the same thing at the same time. So one way that you can do that using, and did you say you did it to YouTube or Facebook?
It's on YouTube.
Yeah, because I don't know about YouTube, but I don't have any experience of that. But you can pre-record stuff, but then do something called a Facebook Premiere, which is kind of like the best of both worlds, because you can pre-record everything, but then you play it. It's only available in the first instance at a specific time on a specific day, so like 10 a.m. on Sunday morning.
Well, that's what we do on YouTube. So it's available. Right. It's not available until 8 o'clock on Sunday morning. So some people watch it for the first, and then they respond. They can text in, like Cheryl was saying, with the Zoom comments or the YouTube comments. But then anyone can watch it and reference it. So they're all they're all in a library on YouTube. So I don't know. I guess I would like to move to live stream, but I think that what people are looking for isn't going to be any different, just more complicated for those 6 of us who show up every day to record the thing. It's going to be more complicated for us.
Well, that's
watch it.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly. I mean, I can't.
I'm a clergy family. I've been doing this since I was born. Accommodating parishioners so that they can just be comfortable in the pews. Now we're doing it so they can be comfortable in their living room, in their bathroom. It's tiring.
I really hear you. I honestly do. And maybe, I mean, and the the simple fact is that in a parish, that if one tries to please all of the people all of the time, we end up pleasing none of the people any of the time. But aside from that, just one possible option could be that you go live, someone goes live in front of the camera at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning and says, welcome everyone. It's so great that we're all together here at the same time. And let's have a time to prepare ourselves for sharing this liturgy, this worship, this Eucharist, if it's a Eucharist. Just have a little time for reflection and prayer, and then launch into the pre-recorded material.
And so I'm trying to envision that, because we have Zoom prayer meetings, Evensong on Wednesday, and we have Compline on Friday. So we could do the same thing on Sunday morning before the
Mhm.
YouTube, we could
Mhm.
say, let's all congregate
Right.
on Zoom
Mhm.
before the video starts,
Mhm.
check in,
Mhm.
offer intercessions.
Mhm.
That's a great idea, because actually because Zoom is so overloaded, our Zoom got moved to 8:15.
Oh,
I mean,
right. Yeah.
our YouTube time got moved to 8:15, so we
Oh,
could
right.
Zoom at 8 and
Right.
do exactly what you're describing.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think
Excellent.
legitimately just a sense of connection that people are looking for, and the idea that they are worshiping at the same time as everybody else gives them that sense of connection. I mean, I had one of our members who moved into the city recently. She responded in our stream a couple times about moving the camera around so that they could see other people in the congregation. And the first time she said it, it really irritated me because I didn't understand why. But then I realized, oh, she misses this connection with her church family. So, you know, it's just like, you know, she can't necessarily wave at them, but she would get to see them and recognize that they're together. And I mean, that's part of who we are. We are community, right? So I could see why they would have that desire and need. But this is the great thing about this. I think if we can get our heads around, this is an opportunity to get creative. There are no playbooks, and maybe that's scary, but for me, I think about, man, there are no playbooks. I can do whatever I want. You know, I can be as creative as I want to address these needs, and if we know what those needs are, you know, like Nils said, or you guys came to, that's a fabulous idea. Cheryl posted in the Zoom chat something I haven't thought about. They have, with her church, she calls them e-ushers that are running the Zoom chat, and that's their role. We know, as long as we know what our mission is and what our purpose is in doing ministry, we can come up with all sorts of amazing new ideas. That's exciting to me, at least.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, if I think about it, the scary side of it, I'll be catatonic. So I have to think about the exciting possibilities side.
Yeah, for even seeing the Eucharist up close, we have one of those recessed sanctuaries. So some people are closer to the liturgy than they've ever been.
Yeah.
Even with the organ, even with the choir. I sit in the choir, so it's customary to me. But some people are seeing our lips move that have never seen it.
Yeah, I had lunch with Michael Bird the other day in Bronxville, and he was saying with his setup, they have a camera on the organist, and where their organist set up, people have never seen their organist play because it's behind these walls. And so for the first time, because of this bizarre streaming need, people are actually getting to see the organist play. And for people who've never watched an organ or an organist play, it's like a magician. And I'm a drummer, and I'm used to having to use all my different limbs in a different way. But watching an organist pull the stops while they're playing with their hands and feet is insane. So it is giving us some new possibilities, and it's really exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the nice things for us has been that having these cameras with these fantastic zooms are that we've been able to get so close into some of our stained glass that we've seen detail of individual brush strokes that none of us have ever noticed. And it's really you know, people have commented on how they just had not appreciated the windows in the way that they now do. So they're, like Kevin was saying, there are lots of unimagined blessings with this.
And that's what the church has done for the last 2,000 years. We've hit these roadblocks in culture and in physical space in different periods, and we've been creative and we've come up with new ways of doing things. So
we're still wearing chasubles.
Right. Well, you know, that's all right. Coming from a real low church evangelical world, I enjoy wearing my dresses every Sunday. So it's fun to dress up. I've never gotten to do that before. But yeah, so we're in this space, and you guys are all early adopters, and that's exciting. And 3-4 years from now, we'll look back and we'll think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did it that way, because now I'm doing it this so much better way. But really the secret and the magic of all of it is just being willing to experiment and just try things, because we're in a place where we have an excuse to experiment and try things. COVID has created a lot of problems, but has given us some opportunities to do some new things and been a great excuse to do those.
Okay, so I think we are reaching this moment where we're going to be concluding this session, and I thank Kevin and Neil for their sharing with us their experiences, and especially kind of helping us figure out where we are. Like at least put in some.
And there we have it, a moment of why
urban entertainment.
you can address them on the fly.
And folks are pretty forgiving, and people understand that this is pioneer territory for us all. And I'll never forget the Sunday where I don't know, like a heavy truck went past and we had a wobbly tripod, and the phone just fell off the tripod and like fell down the back of a pew or something, still broadcasting. And so all that people could see was the church ceiling, and everyone found it hilarious. And people are very forgiving, and those kinds of shared experiences are good for us all, as much as a hugely polished performance. And in fact, I'm not sure people want hugely polished performances, but authentic worship experiences.
All right, we'll give it back to you, Victor.
All right, so I'm sorry about that. My son is sharing connection with us, so it's all of this was Zoom. So thank you, Niels. Thank you, Kevin, for sharing with us your experience and knowledge. And we'll continue, I think, moving in this direction. And on my end, I'll continue consulting with you guys. I think what you are bringing,
thank you,
is something that is helping us a lot. And just want to share for you to see the document that they have created, and is online. I shared as well the link to this document in the chat. So please use it. There are some incredible resources here. And thank you again for creating this. I think something that it was overdue. I think something that we were always trying to figure out how to do, and you did it. Thank you for helping us with this. And thank you for sharing this moment with us. Blessings to you all, to your communities, and let's continue praying for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.